Or lead the prayer. Let's bow your heads.
All right, bow your heads, everybody. Father, we come before you tonight just thanking you for another day. Thanking you for keeping us, for blessing us, for taking us to another season in our lives. God, we just thank you so very much. And God, as we gather here tonight to do the business of the town and our citizens, we ask that you give us the clarity. We ask that you give us understanding. We ask that you let us put personal feelings and personal things aside and focus on the business at hand. So I thank you for that. I also pray tonight, God, for the people over in Gaza and different parts of the country that's going through. It is so very sad. But God, we can only ask that you strengthen those people over there. The hostages that's there, we pray that they are released. We also pray even for this, our community, not here in Benson necessarily, but Clinton had 5 people that were killed. It's just so sad, and it's just getting closer and closer to home. So we ask that you continue to bless Benson, because we have truly been blessed. So God, we just ask that you continue to do that. And then I pray for Jerry's wife tonight, God. I ask that you continue to strengthen him as he strengthens his wife. So I thank you for that tonight, God. This is my prayer, and we say amen.
Amen. Let's stand and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I make a motion.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Public comments, recognition. Come up, Chief.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and board members. In 1981, the state of North Carolina, through the North Carolina Criminal Justice Education and Training Standards Commission, began a program to award certificates to officers who had achieved education, experience, and training milestones. The professional certificate program was designed to recognize the level of competency of officers serving governmental agencies within the state, to foster increased interest in college education and professional training programs, and to attract highly qualified people into law enforcement and criminal justice careers. Eligibility for these professional certificates is determined by a formula that combines formal education, professional training, and work experience as a law enforcement or criminal justice officer. Isaac Potter, a sergeant in the Field Operations Division, recently was awarded an intermediate law enforcement certificate by North Carolina Training and Standards based on his 3.5 years of law enforcement experience, having received a bachelor's degree and his completion of approximately 320 hours of law enforcement continuing education courses. Sergeant Potter joined the Benson Police Department in April of 2021 and has worked tirelessly throughout his time here to further his training and obtain various certifications to benefit both the department and himself. The intermediate certificate is an advanced level recognition from North Carolina Training and Standards, and Sergeant Potter has achieved a noteworthy career goal. We look forward to his continued growth as an officer and a supervisor for and with our department.
Thank you all for having me. I greatly enjoy working here in the town of Benson. It's always a learning experience. Every day I get to come to work, and I try to motivate the guys that work for and with me, the values that we need to uphold here, just like we saw last night and in previous days. Things can go south very quickly, and we need to uphold and support our first responders, both fire, EMS, and police department. Thank you.
Congratulations, Isaac. Presentation of the Unified Development Code update. Karen.
Thank you. It is nice to be back in front of everyone tonight. I know the last time I was here, it was a very, very late meeting. I want to say it was 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock. So I will try not to keep us that late tonight. And I might sit down at some point, because I really want this to be more of a conversation than more of a presentation. I'm going to grab my notes. So again, just the idea of a work session was really just to kind of, bounce the ideas. The steering committee and members of the planning board who are here and have seen this a little bit more detailed than you have, and we're really just trying to roll this out and really make it, get your feedback and understand what your concerns are and how we can, again, make this so that there's buy-in across the board. And we really want this to be in the best interest of all residents of Benson. So, again, this is more of a conversation rather than a presentation, but I'm going to be speaking on behalf of those members of the steering committee that are here and have put in the tireless hours of reading this, sitting through numerous meetings. So, again, tonight's really just more of an update and to have that conversation. So very quickly, our agenda tonight is to go over our project schedule, the table of contents of the new ordinance. We're going to go through article by article and go over a summary of those changes. You'll see you have 2 handouts as well as a copy of the ordinance in front of you. And then we're going to go over what I would like, or when I say I, again, on behalf of Aaron and the steering committee, your comments and suggestions, and then what our next steps are. So first is the project schedule. I think I showed this to you at the last meeting. Basically, we are at the end. We are presenting our findings to you at this work session, and again, meant to be more of a conversation. We are then going to take your comments and suggestions that you'll provide tonight and over the next couple weeks, incorporate them into a final draft that will go to the planning board for their recommendation, and then back to you for a public hearing and adoption. So very quickly, our table of contents. The previous ordinance has 8 sections or 8 articles, and we've now expanded that a little bit to 11. Not that they're much longer, but we have incorporated pictures and charts, and you'll see that. But the Article 1 is our general information. That's this bunch of, and I will excuse the expression, but legalese. Article 2 is going to talk about your zoning districts and development standards, but it's more dimensional standards. I think that's supposed to be dimensional standards. We'll talk about that. That's on that little handout color in front of you. Chapter 3 is the uses and use standards. 4 is subdivision and infrastructure. 5 is environmental protection. 6 are development standards. 7 is signs. 8 is administration. 9 is procedures. 10 is nonconformities, and 11 is definitions. And then you'll see there's an appendice, which includes wireless communications and a plant list. So Article 1 and Article 10 did not change much from your existing ordinance. Basically, what we did is the steering committee, what was one of the very first things we did, is work on updating the purpose of why we zone, or why the zoning ordinance exists, or this UDO code. We use all those words interchangeably. UDC, code, ordinance. It's all this. You'll hear me talk about all 3 of those tonight. But we came up with a revised purpose, and that was the biggest thing that changed in Article 1. In Article 10, there was, the only thing that we really changed there was the timing on what something is considered abandoned before some of the ordinance changes. For those of you who are not familiar with the word nonconforming, you may have heard the word grandfathering in the past. We don't use that term anymore. The nomenclature now is nonconformity. So when we change the ordinance, there is the potential that a property now becomes non-conforming, that it no longer conforms to the ordinance. It may have been non-conforming previously, and that non-conformity may continue, or there might have been something that was conforming before, and now with the change of ordinance, it becomes non-conforming. So that's what a non-conformity is. And there is an ordinance section that will talk to how those are regulated. Article 2 is about your zoning districts, and I just want to spend a second here to talk about the change in the zoning districts. And again, we're not changing anything on the ground. The map itself will stay the same. We're just updating names. And the reason was because when we looked at it, the current zoning districts for residential are R30, R11, and R6. And what those are is those are representative of the single-family residential minimum lot size. So that if you're developing residential and you have a single-family house, that is the minimum lot size that you have to provide. So it's 30,000 square feet in the R30 and the 11,000 square feet in R6, 6,000. And we felt that that may not be necessarily representative of what you're trying to do in those sections. In the R30, yes, primarily it's single family, but you also have other uses that are allowed in the R30 and then don't have a 30,000 square foot requirement. Same with the R11. You don't always have just single-family houses. You're going to be allowed to have duplexes and townhomes, and those have smaller lot sizes. So the R11 isn't necessarily always going to be 11,000 square feet. So we felt it was better to move it to R1, R2, and R3, rather than those basing it on those square footages. Same with commercial. Commercial B1, B2, and B3 were sort of nondescript, and it really wasn't indicative of what we're out there. So those are going to change to CBD, which is your central business district, which is your B1. Your B2 is going to change to your neighborhood business district, and then B3 is changing to highway business district because those commercial areas are on your busier roads. Any questions so far? Okay. Article 2 also talks about dimensional standards, and if I can, just for a quick moment, the orange and blue handout. So this talks about the dimensional standards. These talk about setbacks, talk about the minimum lot sizes, talks about the uses and what uses get what lot sizes, and talks about this table. So in your current ordinance, chapter, or I'm not sure which article it is, but this dimensional table, I think, is on 6 or 7 different charts. So we've condensed it into one chart. There are some areas that are new. So this will correlate with Article 3 when we'll talk about uses. Right now, some uses like single-family attached, which are townhomes, or they could be, you may see them also as carriage houses or other things, but a single-family house that's attached to another unit. Those are currently only permitted by a special use permit. So that, the board has decided that there would be a better use to just allow that with some standards. And we'll talk about that with Article 3. So, but you'll see those, previously those standards were always set by the SUP process, and now we're gonna set what those processes are. Does everybody have, I'm sorry, does everyone have a copy? We have extras. So you'll see that these, as we go down, the other thing that wasn't done previously is that when there was a residential use allowed in a non-residential district, so say when you had your central business district or your neighborhood business district, and a house or some sort of dwelling unit was allowed in that district, there were no regulations that set it. It just kind of said, permitted uses. So we wanted to set, so now you're going to see every place that a residential use is allowed, it's listed on the chart. So those are some of the changes that were made there. There's nothing really much of note in here. We didn't really change anything drastically over what was allowed. The residential 3 district is still at 6,000 square feet for single family. The R2 went from 11,000 to 10,000. And the single-family residential for R1 is still at 30,000. So those main lot areas didn't change. What changed was allowing those different uses in this in the zoning districts. Okay. Article 3. Now this is going to be the stapled list, what we're just going to talk about real quick. So this is where the meat of the ordinance starts coming in, and this is where we're going to want some discussion and feedback. And it's a lot to digest in one sitting. But Article 3 talks about The uses, it lists every use that is permitted in the town and those that are not permitted in the town. It talks about how they are permitted. You'll remember that I mentioned earlier that certain residential uses, anything multifamily, was only allowed with an SUP, which is a special use permit. That's a quasi-judicial process. It's very complicated. It requires you to be sworn in and expert testimony. The planning board is not involved in that process. And while it does allow you some control, it also drives up the cost of the process for a developer. And in turn, developing costs money, that costs more money to build the houses, and then ultimately costs more money for residents to buy those houses. So over time, what we're seeing is that the more difficult you make the process to build housing, the more, or the less affordable your units become. So we're not trying to sell the farm, give it away, but we are trying to make it a little bit easier to develop residential neighborhoods. And this also includes infill development, and we'll talk about that, because infill will be encouraged over breaking ground somewhere else. So some of the things that have changed, anything that was an SUP that is now going to be permitted, we've created standards that will go with that. And those are all listed in Article 3. You'll see some notable sections that are missing. In Article 3, there is a triplex and a quadplex, and those are permitted with standards. Those standards are not in Article 3, and the reason those are not there is the legislation recently changed the rules that you cannot put design standards on triplexes and quadplexes. Those are going to be treated like single-family homes. So we are no longer, so we had to pull out some of the articles or some of the conditions that we wanted to put on those types of developments, so those are no longer in there. So we're working on getting those updated, so you'll see those soon. But again, we didn't go through here with any sort of drastic sweeping changes. Just the changes that we thought were of substance were the residential. We clarified and modified the adult care homes and the group homes. You'll see those on here. But there's still a number of uses that are permitted by SUP. And again, PS means that they're permitted with standards, and those standards are included in Chapter 3. Any questions so far? Again, this is a lot to digest, so I just wanted to stop and see if there's any questions. Okay, we'll keep going, and then we can go back and chat a little bit. Okay, Article 4 talks about subdivision and infrastructure. Again, not a ton of changes here. This chapter was originally your subdivision chapter. So way before you had a unified ordinance or you had a unified code, there was zoning and then there was subdivision. Subdivision is very regulated by the state, and now when we merge them, there's a lot of overlap with zoning. But things like roads and sidewalks and utilities are both dealing in subdivision and in when you have site plans or when you have non-residential development. So we've combined those into one chapter. Biggest things that were changed in here was that the streets section that we currently had in this ordinance did not match NCDOT's requirements. So because we're trying to become in alignment with what NCDOT requires, we changed the road classifications to NCDOT. The other one that we changed was there was no provision for the ownership of open space, so we created some language requiring HOAs or property owner associations, and those their CC&Rs or their restrictions need to be submitted to the town so that they can review it to make sure that open spaces are taken care of in longevity by the homeowners association rather than by the town. Also, I'm just trying to see what's on there. Annexation, that was another thing that came up, was that in order to get town services, such as water and sewer, that developers would need to annex those properties into the town so that it's not just providing it to areas outside in the county that they would have to annex in. Okay, environmental protection. So Article 5 is a brand-new article. These sort of regulations were sporadic throughout the ordinance, and we felt that it was important to bring them all together and talk about environmental protection. So first, the thing is that the town is currently in the process of updating their stormwater management ordinance, and it is thought that at some point in time, those ordinance standards, or some of those ordinance standards, will be folded into this chapter. So this chapter is somewhat of a placeholder for right now until the stormwater management ordinance is completed. Another item that we wanted to talk about was that in the ordinance, there's numerous mentions of conservation areas or resource conservation areas, and it didn't really, until you sit down and read the entire ordinance, that kind of didn't make much sense to us. So what we did is we put that into one section, and basically what that resource protection area says is that you can't, when you have open space, we'll talk later a bit about an open space requirement that's new, but that open space requirement can't be all this resource area, and that resource areas shouldn't be put onto individual homeowners' lots. So when somebody comes in and subdivides, and they want to build their house, 5 feet from a pond or from a wetlands or a floodplain, we're trying to really get those so that they stay off the lot, and those resource protection areas stay in the open space that will be taken care of either by the town or by the homeowners association. Because as we all know, when you have a lot and somebody wants to build a house and it's in their property, those resources tend to get disturbed or taken down. The other thing that's in here is that, again, because the town doesn't have a lot of their own standalone ordinances for stormwater, for floodplain, and for that, we reference, a lot of the ordinances are mentioned by reference. So if those guiding documents from the state or from Johnston County are updated, they're automatically updated with our ordinance. So we haven't necessarily brought all of those ordinances over because, again, they're getting constantly updated. Stormwater's getting updated. Fire code is getting updated. NCDOT was doing something with subdivision manual, and that comes out constantly. So anytime those are getting updated, if we mention it by reference, then we don't have to go in and update the zoning ordinance or the code. Okay, any other questions right now? Okay, I will keep going. All right, Chapter 6, or Article 6, Development Standards. So a lot changed in here. So if you want some really interesting reading, you can read Article 6. First and foremost was open space. We spent a lot of time at steering committee talking about open space. There has been a push, and we've seen it in a lot of the communities in the Triangle area, for open space to be developed not just on residential properties, but also on commercial and industrial properties. And why, might you ask? You are located right off a highway. I don't know how many of you travel up and down I-95, but when you stop and you want to get out and you want to walk your dog, it's very convenient when there's a little piece of open space, whether it's a picnic area, someplace to eat outside, or just someplace for your kids to run around. The provision of open space is a nice amenity, not only for your residents, your visitors, but also for your employees. So for industrial sites or commercial sites, it is nice to have open space. And we're not talking massive amounts of open space, but we're talking 5 to 7%. And that would allow, again, for a picnic area, a walking trail, some sort of, again, passive, active open space for visitors to the property. So that is going in the highway business and industrial districts for right now. And then also allowed for or required for any multifamily use as well as single-family use. And then another change in here was that originally you had an open space subdivision ordinance, and that open space subdivision, according to Aaron, that option has never been used in the town. So we're changing that to a cluster, development. And what that does is going to require 40% open space. And I know that sounds like a lot, but what that does is that allows the developer to really lower the lot size, cluster all of those together, and leave a bigger area of open space. We see this typically along areas where there's large stands of trees, along riverbanks, along floodplain or wetlands, and that allows you to really preserve those open space areas, and again, cluster the development on the areas that are flat, have utilities available, and can accommodate that type of development. So again, it's to encourage open space and encourage clustering of development in those areas. So again, that's a 40% requirement for open space. It's an option. It just is an option for someone to do. They don't have to do that. The other one that we made an option, or you'll see it on here, this is really, the first slide's talking about the changes that we made, and then we'll see what the ultimate is. But the first one is the open space requirements. The second one is that we wanted to talk about the preserving of character for infill development. Again, that was a big concern. We have very, very strong neighborhoods here in Benson, and when one of those lots might be vacant and somebody wants to come in, we wanted to really preserve the character so that, just using the street out behind us, for example, everything seems to be about 1 story, maybe 1.5 stories. It would be really obtrusive for someone to come in with a 3-story, apartment, not apartment, but a 3-story larger house. We're seeing a lot of not here, but again, in the triangle, seeing a lot of tear downs and rebuilds, and it really just destroys the community, not the community, the character of the community. Sorry, I don't mean to say that. But the character of the community, we really want to really encourage the character because, again, the neighborhoods here are so special. So we'll talk about infill in a second. And then the other one is that we updated parking requirements. There was a question that maybe parking wasn't being provided heavily enough. And when you look at it, Benson is actually very on par with towns. It actually requires more parking than most communities. There is a big push nationwide to reduce parking, to almost provide really very little parking with the encouragement of pedestrian and biking. So we also wanted to provide some incentive for pedestrian provisions, and we'll talk about that in 1 second. And then the last was design standards for buildings. And that basically just allows commercial buildings to have transparency, push parking to the back and sides of building, bringing the buildings up front, and some of those sort of what we've called neo-traditional design standards.
How much static you think you're going to get when you tell them that the amount of open space has grown dramatically? As expensive as land is, how are you going to save 40%?
Oh, that's if they want to, and that's only in areas, again, where they're going to be high environmental concerns. So where it's usually an advantage to the developer because you're going to see that in an area where 40% of their site is generally unbuildable anyway, because you're going to have a lot of trees, you're going to have a lot of water features or something along those lines. So we generally don't see that on a virgin piece of property that is like old farmland where it's just, it could be built. Those will probably be stuck to the regular zoning that they're allowed.
But why put it in the UDO if it's not something that is going to happen?
So again, if you have a property that is heavily with environmental concerns, when you take out all those areas, there's not much left for the developer to build on. So this gives the developer the incentive to have higher densities in the areas where they can build and preserve those areas of open space, rather than trying to like, again, you can build up to that certain edge, but this allows you to then preserve around it and cluster the development. So it's like an incentive to the developer with higher density than they would get on just a plain site. Oh, commercial and industrial. So the commercial sites are not 40%. The commercial open space is 7.5, I think it's 7.5 or 5, and then 5% for commercial.
Why did you say that?
40% was for the cluster subdivisions for for residential, but the open space for, industrial developments and commercial developments in the highway business district, we're proposing to have open space of 5% or 7% of the site, not 40.
Yeah.
If you make the changes in the designation of zoning, is that something that's going to be a standard for the whole world, or is that something just for us?
It's just for
Where
Benson.
we changed R11 and R6 to something else?
Nope, that's just Benson. That's just you, your town, only Benson.
Why?
We don't have the control to do it anywhere else. So the zoning districts are only applicable to the town and the ETJ of Benson. You can't do that. We don't have the legislative authority to do it anywhere else. The county could do that anywhere in their jurisdiction, but because the way that the zoning laws are written is that the only place that we can change the zoning rules are within the area within Benson and within the ETJ. Okay, any other questions? All right, so I'll just finish up here. One of the other things we talked about, again, was infill development. And I want to talk about this because we think this is really a good thing for Benson. I really like it that I'm trying to push it in some of our other communities we work in because I just think it's a great idea. Infill development, what the definition is basically if you have a street that is already built, has 5, 6, 7 homes, whatever the block is, and there's one single lot that isn't developed, and a developer wants to come in, or the property owner finally wants to build a house on it, the infill regulations will take precedent over the existing zoning, so that, say that the existing zoning requires a 20-foot setback. And the reason we always require 20-foot setback, you'll see that on this chart, 20 foot. And the reason that is because most people want to park their car in their driveway. So that's why the setback is 20 feet, because you usually want to park your car there. But say that on this certain block that the buildings are only set back 5 feet. Most of them are 5 feet. And then there's one house that's 10 feet. We're going to say that you have the ability, or that person has the ability, to build their building between the shortest setback, which is 5, and the greatest setback, which is 10, so that they build their setback between 5 and 10 feet, so that it doesn't look odd on the street. It matches, so that that setback is continual. Also, same with building height. Your building is not going to be able to be, I think, I forget what the percentage is, but there's a percentage higher or number of feet higher. You can't go higher than your neighbor. So the idea is, again, to build to what is around you so that those changes aren't so drastic, and that from the front, from the street front, that you are going to be compatible with your neighbors. Okay, any other questions on that? Oh, and then you'll see the other thing, I'm sorry, that's up there, I forgot, is the 0 lot line. In your current ordinance, 0 lot line is a type of housing. It was like a type of unit. A 0 lot line basically just means that you have a single-family house and that you have shifted it over to one side. So instead of providing yards on either side, because we usually have your house in the middle and you have a side yard on either side, a 0 lot line allows you to move your house all the way over to the side line. We see this typically in new development. We don't see it a lot in infill development or anything that's existing. It was somewhat of the rage a couple years ago, especially out on the West Coast. I'm not really sure what the benefit of it is, but we didn't want to eliminate it in case anyone in Benson had their eyes set on doing a 0 lot line. So we're allowing it as a design option, but rather than it being a housing type, we took it out of there. Okay, anything else? Any other questions? I'm talking a lot, so I really want to speed through this and let you guys have some conversation and talk. Article 7 is signs. We tried really hard not to change a lot with the signs because everybody seems pretty happy with the signs. The biggest question or biggest concern we had on signs was that some of the business owners in the CBD or in your downtown didn't have visibility from the side streets. We felt that that was more of a concern of wayfinding signage, and that's really not the purpose in your zoning ordinance, because wayfinding signage is done by the town or by your downtown association. That's not typically done by individual property owners. So we don't talk about necessarily wayfinding signage in this ordinance. But we did want to create signage that would be able to be visible from the side. So we added in things like awning signs and hanging signs and things that could be visible from the side of a building rather than just from the front of a building. So you'll see that throughout this. We've created a lot of graphics and a lot of charts in the sign ordinance. Some of that is under construction as we speak. We'll be moving some of those pictures into charts, but you'll see that there's a lot of 3D graphics that have been added into the plan so that you can see what a sign looks like, so it's more visible rather than just text, because the previous ordinance was just a lot of text. Murals?
Of signs.
Murals are part of signs, yes. So currently, murals are in your sign ordinance, or there's a mural ordinance, and we literally took that verbatim because that was fairly new. We didn't really change much of that, but that is put into the sign ordinance, yes. And one of the other things with signs that we're working on, so some of it you'll see a little bit of a change. There was an article, Gilbert versus Reed. It's a case law out of, I believe, Texas, that you cannot base a sign on what it says. So you cannot read the content of a sign in regulating it. So without going into too many details, but there was a church that put up those little wayfinding, like those little, call them Snape signs, like the little 24 by 36 corrugated, yarded corrugated plastic signs. And the town was taking the church signs out, but wasn't taking the Little League baseball ones out. And the church basically said, why are you taking our signs out, but you're not taking their signs out? And it was basically based on what they were advertising. And so there's this big push now to eliminate, well, we have to, went all the way to the Supreme Court. So we are not allowed to regulate signs based on the content. So you'll see in the ordinance, there's some in there that are like, there's still yard sale sign and there's still for sale signs. Those are the incidental signs that some people don't seem to have an issue with. We are going to look at that a little bit more, because I think what we're going to try and do is just go to like temporary signs and just kind of call them temporary signs and just regulate the size of that sign and say what they can do. But again, that's under review, and we'll have the attorney look at that a little bit more so that we can make sure that that one is fitting there. Question?
Content was the word you were looking for, and I knew it was right on the tip of your
It was
tongue.
right on the tip of my tongue.
Trying to
Content,
serve it up
yes.
to you, but
You
got it.
can't read the words on the sign. It's content. Thank you. Yes?
I didn't spend a lot of time on the sign article, but is there, because of the character of the town, is there something in there that states whether or not marquees can have all kinds of flashing lights?
No flashing lights. Nothing that mimics, usually nothing that mimics motion. So if you have an LED sign that, you can't like look like something's moving or something's motion, like the words cannot bleed in and bleed out. It's a static message, and then it changes. So no, and there should not be any inflatables or balloon guys, any of those. We don't like them. So they should all be in there, and if they're not, we'll add that. We'll make sure that those get added in, but that should all be in there. Okay, Article 8, wasn't much of a change. Administration. Basically, some of your administration codes are in your code of ordinances rather than in your zoning ordinance, so we just wanted to make sure that they were all in one place. It talks about Board of Commissioners and their role in development. It talks about the Planning Board. It talks about TRC, which is your Technical Review Committee, talks about your Board of Adjustment, and then talks about your Planning Director or Administrator. And it talks about your code of ethics, or your conflict of interest, also talks about taking oath and taking minutes, and those kinds of things. So basically, it's just an administrative chapter. There were not many changes to it, except, again, to put it all into one place and to be in conformance with 160D. For those of you who don't know what 160D is, I mentioned that a lot. It's mentioned and referenced in the ordinance a lot. If you're not familiar with it, 160D is the enabling legislation from the state that allows municipalities to plan and create codes. So that, all that is the enabling legislation. There is if you want to print it off, it's online. School of Government has a great website dedicated to 160D and talking about all the updates that have come out since that was adopted in 2019? 2019? Newer ones? Yeah. Effect, yes. And that requires you to have an updated land use plan. It requires you to have zoning, if you want to have zoning. Article 9 is a lot. Again, so Article 6 and Article 9 are going to be where the majority of the changes have happened. And when I say Article 9, changes have happened, it's not a lot of changes have happened. But what we did is we kind of pulled it all together. So you had a very intensive procedures article to begin with. We've basically brought that over. We're in the process of working on some flow charts. Those are not in the ordinance yet. You will see those soon, but that's just basically a graphic, but we wanted to eliminate a lot of the words, so you're going to see a lot of charts. On the back of your orange and blue one, you're going to see a blue chart that talks about all the processes. So again, I mentioned earlier that we eliminated some things, some uses that were special use permits. So you're going to see on here some of the changes that have been made because of that. Anything that says, you're going to look under, I guess, your reviewer and your approving body. So this isn't intended to take away power from the planning board or take away power from the Board of Commissioners. What this is intended is to make the process efficient and move easily for your development community. I know that you have a number of hearings next month, and those meetings can be long and cumbersome. So again, this is not intended to take away any power, but some of these changes in processes from 160D required some of the changes, and I'll just go over what those are quickly. So basically, when you have a quasi-judicial process, and I think most of you are familiar with the quasi-judicial process, that requires a hearing, and that hearing is not allowed to have any ex parte communication. You're supposed to base your decision solely on the information that is presented to you at the hearing. So when a board, such as Board of Commissioners or the Board of Adjustment, is making a quasi-judicial decision, they're not supposed to be listening to their neighbors or what they heard at the grocery store or read in the paper or what their family member said to them or anything like that. It's really supposed to be based on the information provided that evening or day in the hearing. In a small town, it's very difficult to have that because everybody knows everybody's business, and it happens everywhere. So quasi-judicial processes are hard to maintain that integrity. So we want to try really hard to limit the number of quasi-judicial so that those are really saved for those very important decisions and important discussions. So you'll see on here that one, just for example, the bigger one that we'll talk about is major subdivision plats. So if you go down about 7 or 8, it'll say major subdivision plat. One of the changes is that anything less than 20 lots, a subdivision less than 20 lots, is going to be an administrative process. If the developer comes in and meets all of the requirements of the ordinance, crosses their T's, has dotted their I's, the zoning is correct, and they are good to go, Aaron can approve that subdivision. If it's more than 20 lots and it doesn't meet the it does meet the requirements or anything else, that's going to come before this board as a quasi-judicial process. So they're going to come in, they're going to need to swear in, they're going to need to show this, and they'll show all those procedures. Now, you might say 20 lots is too much. We don't want Aaron to have 20 20 lots, no offense to Aaron, but the idea is that those bigger decisions, those bigger developments that are going to have a greater impact, that are going to require a TIA, that are going, and a TIA is a traffic impact analysis, sorry. Those bigger decisions will require more information and the board to have some flexibility in their approval. The problem is, if ordinances are, and again, let me just take a step back. When you have a zoning decision, if it meets the requirements of the ordinance, again, it's currently zoned, the right zone for what they want to do, your hands are kind of tied in what you can and cannot allow. If they meet the requirements of your ordinance, and there is no sort of, they do everything, they are bound and allowed to build on that site. There's not much you can do to say no, because they met the requirements of your ordinance. So even if it's an administrative decision, you still have to kind of allow that. Where you have that flexibility or where you have that discretion is in the SUP process. Also, and the newer process now is conditional zoning. So some of you may be aware with conditional zoning, that is a legislative process, but allows you to condition an approval and have that conversation with the developer as to put conditions on the things, on the application and on the approval. So there's a couple of things at play here, but I want you to go through this development process table and look at where they are. The bigger changes are on the next page. We'll talk through this. Okay, so basically this is what's changing on here. Exempt subdivisions, they remain the same. That's anything, there's 5 criteria for what an exempt subdivision is, and forgive me that I don't know those right off the top of my head, but that's going to remain the same. That's an administrative process. Again, Aaron, the TRC, or Aaron has to approve those. Those are basically exempt from any sort of requirements, as long as they submit a final plat that goes through. Expedited subdivisions are something new with 160D. They are meant to be, again, a very quick administrative process. The only problem that we have been seeing with expedited subdivisions is that you're only allowed to subdivide once in every 10 years. So if someone's coming in with the anticipation that they're going to further subdivide that, we would suggest that they not do an expedited subdivision, because the property involved in an expedited subdivision can be only done once every 10 years. But again, this is for larger pieces of property that somebody might be trying to subdivide for their family, and then there would be no intention of further subdivision. Minor subdivisions also remain the same. This is for 5 lots with no public water or no public roads. Those are also administrative. Those might, depending on the intensity, get a preliminary plat, but most likely those are also just a final plat. So this is where the changes come. Major subdivision, this is what we were just talking about. Under 20 lots would become an administrative process. And again, this does not involve a rezoning. This does not involve a use within SUP. This is just a major subdivision under 20 lots that meets all the requirements of the zoning ordinance would go to Aaron for an administrative approval. Those over 20 lots is going to be your current process, which is a quasi-judicial hearing. They have to meet findings of fact, and that's where you have that built-in discretion with the findings of fact and a quasi-judicial hearing. Minor site plan, those under 20,000 square feet of development or under 40 multifamily units, that will also become administrative. So that's going to go, and those initials there you see. So Aaron will submit it to TRC. That's your engineer, your fire department, I guess emergency services, the county. They'll all review those plans. And so it's not just Aaron making a decision in a bubble. But again, as long as there's no SUP required, or as long as there is the current zoning, that will become an administrative decision. Major site plan, however, instead of it being a quasi-judicial hearing, what that currently is major site plans come before this board. Actually, I think right now they go before planning board, correct? So major site plans will not go before planning board for approval. They'll go before planning board for an advisory comment or advisory a recommendation. Thanks. I'm trying to find those words. So major site plan will go before planning board and then come before the Board of Commissioners, but as an administrative process. So again, you're seeing those larger applications, but if that meets all the requirements, you're sort of bound to approve that. You don't have that discretion. If there's an interest, we could also make that an SUP, and then that comes before you as well with that discretion. But again, if they're meeting the requirements right now, it was thought that that process, trying to keep it very similar to what we had or what is current, that's the route that goes. Okay, so this is probably going to ask a lot of questions. So I wanted to pause here and just see, because the next chapter we talked about already, which was Article 10, which was nonconformity. So we already talked about that. So this is like probably a good break right now to ask any questions on this process and procedures. If those thresholds are too high or too low, and you want to talk about the thresholds, we could talk about those thresholds. Nothing here is written in stone. This is a draft. This is the conversation that we're meeting to have. These are the recommendations that came from us and from the steering committee and from Aaron. We talked about this chapter ad nauseum, but I would love to hear your feedback, questions, comments, concerns.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm not sure this, like, per se, is just a quasi-judicial hearing thing. When we're supposed to take the information we only find at that night, is it not okay or okay if there's land that's gonna be developed for development, let's say? Is it okay to go look at it?
You're gonna go look at it? If everybody goes, right then,
No,
like
I'm
a field
talking about
trip?
if you decided, I'm gonna go prior, I'm gonna go right out to, and look at the land.
You're not supposed to form an opinion prior to that hearing. I think if you were gonna go look at it and walk it and start forming opinions based on what you were looking at, that would probably be over the line. You would better off to say, I think we all need to go out there as a group. I make a motion, or I suggest that this board consider, convening out there on a certain date, and that way, because the big deal is there, just like court, is that both parties, because there's liable to be somebody in opposition to that, have to have an opportunity to know what's being said, know what's being presented, and present evidence to the contrary. So if you're out there coming up with your own, now I guess it's innocuous enough to just say, well, I just walked around or drove by it, and practically speaking, I don't know if anybody's gonna throw you in jail or say you're breaking the law because you drove by it. If it's a small town, you're gonna probably drive by it.
You might even know the property. I mean,
Right.
it might be your next door neighbor for all you know.
Can't help that,
Right.
but with the express purpose, I guess, what was your intent in going out there if you were walking around saying, I'm gonna do a little investigation on my own, that would be problematic.
And if you did do that, I think if you disclosed that at the beginning of the meeting and said, this is my next door neighbor, or I'm familiar with this property, I already went out and walked it, as long as you disclosed it and you're not really forming an opinion, you just wanted to go out there and look at it for your own knowledge, I don't think that's necessarily, like you said, no, I don't think anybody's going to throw you in jail because of it. And especially if you do disclose it, it's generally fine. Usually that disclosure at the beginning of you can usually
Yeah,
get around
that's why when we do those quasi-judicial hearings, I call for disclosures, any conversations, any pre-hearing opinions that you need to disclose, or obviously conflicts of interest, or certainly if you know the applicant or anything like that, or you have any ex parte communication with, that's what one of the things I'm asking for is you say, tell it now, or it may indeed be if it's such a conflict that you need to be considered for recusal, or something like that. Or if somebody stopped you in the food line and talked to you about it, or tried to for 5 minutes, you'd be better off saying, look, somebody on behalf of one of the property owners talked to me in the food line. I didn't really say anything, but they told me a couple things. Here's what they told me. Again, you're getting it out in the open, where if there's a party over there that's against this and they've got an attorney, they can say, okay, well, I'm going to ask some questions about that, but it's all above board.
So where does it become, if let's say that somebody does come up to your grocery store and says, I want to talk to you about X, Y, Z, and you go, oh, I can't talk about that, they go, okay. Do you have to report that, or do you have to, does it get where they really start giving you information? Where's the line?
When in doubt, I would say tell it, right? Let it be known at that hearing. When I call for disclosures of any outside ex parte communications, you say, the developer, look, if you just repass in an aisle of a grocery store and say hello, I think that's ridiculous that the law isn't trying to make you go into detail about every little thing. But if you had something of a conversation or they said something to you, he told me, we really hope that I approved his development and said it's really going to be great for the town of Benson. That's all he said. I said, I can't talk about that. And I said goodnight, and we went our separate ways. And you've told it. So when in doubt, I would say, just practically to everybody, go ahead and say that happened. And I would advise you that if they do that, make sure to tell them I can't have a discussion with you about
Is this something that's
it.
changing with the UDO, or I had done wrong in the past for going out and looking at properties that we were to zone or rezone?
Well, zoning's
Had
different.
some on- Had some on Searles Road. Was that wrong?
Zoning's different.
No,
Zoning's
zoning's different.
legislative. Yeah.
Well,
Like-
didn't we do the same thing then?
Yeah.
That was a subdivision. That was a
Yeah, well, I just wanna know if it was right or wrong. What if we don't get all the information that we need from the planning board or from you, and we feel like that, hey, she doesn't really know where this property is, and it's backing up to a wetlands that maybe hadn't showed up that you know about. I'm just asking for my own personal, self. If I go out there and come to a meeting and we start talking about it, well, I need to let them know that the Searles Road property, I was out there and I was with the fire chief, and we rode the whole property line, and
I think you need to tell that, because what you've done is gone and gotten evidence for yourself that you're going to use to base your decision on, and no one else knows about it. And remember, you're supposed to only base it on what you hear in that hearing. Now, if you want that information,
okay,
you don't feel,
how am I supposed to get that information before that hearing?
as the board, you can say, I don't think we have enough, or we have specific questions. You can ask those of the parties, the developer or the applicant. If you want to go out there and look at it, that's something you're entitled to say. Otherwise, I guess the inferential thing you can say there is that if you don't feel like you have enough information, then you have the discretion to say, I don't think you've met the findings of fact. So
Okay,
I
is
need
the
more
UDO
information.
Is the UDO, the new one, is it changing that any, or that's always been in place?
That's been in place.
Okay.
So what we're trying to do is, again, because this process is so cumbersome, or can be so cumbersome, and it doesn't allow the planning board to give their opinion, because quasi-judicial is just at the hearing. So planning board is no longer going to hear anything quasi-judicial. We're trying to eliminate as many SUPs as possible because that process is so cumbersome. So that's why there are a lot of the changes that you're seeing, is to eliminate a lot of the SUPs, because many of those were in your ordinance as is. Yeah, Aaron wanted to add a little bit.
The changes that they're talking about proposing right now is what's gonna keep the people from being underneath our carport or underneath our garage when they get home from a planning board meeting mad because of what happened at the planning board meeting. It's taking that extra step from giving them the ability to come here, be heard by a board, get upset with the decision, and then come and knock on our door and give us that phone call because it's not heard until it gets to us. And then we make that decision there. It bypasses that process. I think it keeps us out of getting in hot water. I mean, realistically, it takes the liability off of us when you go home and there's a group of people mad because the planning board just passed a subdivision. It's happened to me. I'm assuming it's happened to y'all too.
I really think Ike needs to take a look at that, because I tell you, we have, as long as I can ever remember, gone out to places, you gotta put a mobile home here or somebody wants to put a home here that's different, then you've gone out to look to see if what's there.
But that's
And
not
I don't
the same
think
thing.
that's against the law.
No, we're talking about a quasi
Yeah.
judicial.
Well, mobile home placement's quasi judicial right now because it's special use permit.
No, it will be.
It
No,
won't?
special, no, mobile home parks will. Mobile home, the whole mobile home park.
Right now, a manufactured home just being placed on one single lot is a special use permit, as well as a mobile home park where you have multiple manufactured homes on one lot. What we're proposing is to allow a manufactured home on one single lot of ownership, one placement of that manufactured home as
That's allowed.
permitted by standard, but to keep mobile home parks, like you have Gaines Mobile Home Park or Chicopee or, 301 Mobile Home Park, any new mobile home park would continue to be reviewed and approved as a special use permit. But I wanted to add, because Karen and I kind of mulled over this, with our major subdivisions, it doesn't name it outright in our ordinance as a special use permit. However, we're conducting those hearings as quasi-judicial because it says it in our current ordinance, we must have an evidentiary hearing. It must be approved by the findings of fact, the very nature of the quasi-judicial. However, we're not putting it as a special use permit. It's more of the procedure. And, we've all sat through these major subdivisions, and they've been grueling and they've been hard, and you feel conflicted on what can I say, what can't I say. And my biggest question in this process is, do we want to keep even major subdivisions as a quasi-judicial proceeding, or should we consider having it as a conditional zoning or even approved administratively, all major subdivisions? And that's something I'm kind of interested in hearing from you all, going through these subdivisions over the last several years as quasi-judicial proceedings. Do you feel that that is the most appropriate way for us to approve major subdivisions in the town?
I've got something that kind of leads to that. I don't know if this is the right time to say that or not. The quasi-judicial hearing, in my experience over these past few years, lawyer comes in, got an engineer, got a traffic guy, paid the engineer, paid the traffic guy. They give us their deal. Use another word for that, but it's their whatever. And
Dog and pony show.
Nice to the lawyers.
Yeah, and they, nobody else has got standing, nobody else can say anything. And I've asked the question before, what if the traffic is heavy and you said what repercussions do we have? And the answer I've always heard from everybody is zero. Flood, we had a person that's in my neighborhood that had a lot that was, the division was pointing down to it. And he said his yard was gonna flood, and they told him, you don't have standing. He don't have standing to say his own yard's gonna flood. And so I wanna know, is there a way to get around that system? Because it seems to me to be a person, a traffic guy. I'd like to know how many times in these things have you ever said, I believe the traffic's gonna be too bad to do this? Or the flooding guy, how many times? Because I expect that's never happened.
Well, I'm gonna piggyback off of Max then. I wanna ask, what are the options then, I guess, in doing this? What are our other options to have somebody come up to the podium, swear in and say, hey, give us your testimony on what you think it will do to your lots, and then the people here talk about it and actually can have a discussion and it not be so, I guess, handcuffed. Like, it feels like everybody here is handcuffed the entire time the process is going. I just don't know the other options.
Okay.
And that just,
I'll let.
go ahead.
Well, maybe in a distilled fashion, that is kind of what's supposed to happen, right?
Okay.
What practically happens, y'all, is that the applicant has their you-know-what together, and they come up here with lawyers and experts, and the property owners don't know anything about this process, right? The attorneys that you've seen in here on the most of these hearings are also municipal attorneys. They sit in seats like I do, representing towns and counties and so forth, and they know the law. They know exactly what they need to hit. And yeah, it is sort of feels like the property owner that is wanting to make arguments contrary to that doesn't really know what they're doing, and you don't know what you're supposed to listen to, and the lawyer's attacking stuff. I would say certain things when it comes to standing, and that's something that I get into, and almost like Wadir when I'm asking them questions about it. It's for the board to rule on that ultimately, but unless it's somebody who says, well, look, I live on the other side of town, and I've read all this in the public board meeting disclosures, and I can't stand to think that y'all are going to let more people move down here and just develop more of this land. It's already too crowded. That guy doesn't have standing. Right? You rarely get that, though. What you get a lot of the times is somebody who's like adjacent and saying, this is going to flood. Well, I think that guy has standing. That lawyer can sit there and be a lawyer and shoot holes in everything he says and cross-examining him. But I get to tell him and have standing to testify that I've lived on my...
This is the-
No,
I'm
that's...
with you, like,
I'm hearing the meeting. You ain't putting me on the spot.
I hear everybody, it's like, that sounds like where we kinda all.
Well, and the conversation, I mean, Aaron and I, when I say could beat a dead horse with this, like, we talked about it because originally we thought, conditional zoning, it's fairly new. Conditional zoning came out with 160D, and what that does, and I hate to say this, but think spot zoning. You can't spot zone, so
Yeah.
you can't really say that.
It's not.
It's not spot zoning, but
if
think
you use
along those
that
lines.
word to describe it,
Yeah, so basically what conditional zoning is you have a piece of property, the applicant comes in and says, you know what, I want to put some conditions on here and I want some flexibility with the way that I'm going to design this. So maybe instead of a 20-foot setback, can I have a 10-foot setback, but I'm going to plant a double row of evergreens to make up for that. And conditional zoning allows you to have that flexibility. It allows you to say, you want to put a double row, we want a triple row. And the applicant can be, all right, I really want that 10-foot setback, I'll put up the triple row instead of the 20. So there's like a little give and take in conditional zoning. And and they submit a site plan, and then the development has to be built to that site plan. If they vary any, they got to come back before you. So it's a very attractive type of thing to boards. We're seeing a lot of towns almost won't entertain anything unless they come in with conditional zoning.
But
It's not quasi-judicial, it's legislative. And
You
with
can
it being,
go out there and walk it and ask anybody and pretty much do within reason. You just can't be arbitrary in your decision ultimately, but you can base your decision on, it's like deciding on what the speed limit should be on Church Street. You're elected to decide things like that. It's a legislative decision.
And the
So-
benefit of a legislative decision is that the planning board will have the opportunity to review the application, provide the Board of Commissioners with a recommendation, and then there's also a neighborhood meeting. So the applicant is then required to meet with the surrounding property owners ahead of time, present what they're going to present, and when we find in towns that have that required neighborhood meeting, 50 to 60% of the questions that those neighbors are going to come out with pitchforks at the meeting, they're going to have those questions answered. A recent story, just real quick. I went to a meeting where somebody wanted to put up a self-storage unit very close to a neighborhood. The town was against it. The town wanted a restaurant there. But the neighbors came out again. I mean, I got to say, there was 100 residents came out. We don't want this massive, we don't want this, self-storage unit. We already have one. We don't want self-storage. But when they talk about it and you listen to it, this neighborhood meeting, they said, a self-storage unit maybe only requires 10 parking spaces max. People, come in, they drop their stuff off, and then maybe they're coming back once a year, twice a year. Where a restaurant, you're going to have people in and out all the time, every day, weekends, constant traffic. And the neighbors were like, we don't want more traffic. So they were willing to take a 4-story self-storage unit over, a 3,000 square foot restaurant because of the amount of traffic that it was going to cause. But that conversation came out of the neighborhood meeting. So when they went before the board, all these neighbors came out actually in support of it, rather than coming out against it. So the required neighborhood meeting, the legislative hearing, those are also options, but they don't give you that discretion. Those are things that if they meet the requirements, those have to get approved.
And the other side of that point is that when you have conditional zoning and you have multiple subdivisions or developments that have been approved through conditional zoning, now you essentially have these, not spot zoning, but you have this land and these developments that have their own set of conditions. And so it becomes a huge consideration for administrative.
Yes.
Because now you have to keep up with all of those conditions and that particular, and so it's almost as if you are defragmenting your ordinance because everyone has their own development standards, and you may have 100 conditionally zoned properties. Now, we have to make sure that each conditionally zoned property strictly adheres to that approval and those conditions of that site plan. And so that's something that I always.
That's a little bit of the drawback there.
Yeah.
If you want to see a town that has excessive conditional zoning, look at Wake Forest, Rollsville. They're starting, those towns have excessive numbers of conditional zonings, and their zoning map is like every zone, CZ, 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 because it's conditional zoning all over the maps. So anyway, so those are, go ahead.
On that chart right there.
Yes.
So it says, major subdivision, minor site plan, and major site plan.
Yes.
It seems like the planning board doesn't look at any of those anymore, but that's the way I'm reading it, right? So wouldn't the planning board have a different set of eyes on the findings of facts than maybe the commissioners might have, and that might be something to consider?
Except that in a quasi-judicial, all that information has to be presented at the hearing. So if the planning board's reviewing it before the hearing, then you're talking about it outside of the hearing. So that's frowned upon.
Well, and the problem with that is that we've talked about that, Aaron and I, many times, is if she comes in and says, the planning board talked about this, and the planning board did that, and the planning board recommends this, that's hearsay. Because remember, it's like a court proceeding, and y'all are the judges. That's what I always say when we start those. Y'all are like the judges. And a judge in a case, if you're a litigant in a case, and the judge has already gotten briefed about what your case is about because of some preliminary hearing or something that went on last week, and then he comes in there and says, okay, what do you got to tell me about it now? Well, he or she they already know a lot about your case, so Aaron can't really come in and say anything about the plan and what the planning board did, right? And so it kind of becomes an awkward way to fit those together, I think, when they basically got to come and do all that over again at the board level anyway.
And somehow some towns have gotten around that, is they'd have joint hearings. So one of your meetings a month would be both planning board and board of commissioners. You have a joint meeting. Those meetings, you hold the public hearing. And then that way the planning board is subject to the same information that was provided to the board of commissioners. You can close the hearing. Planning board can make their recommendation. And then that way the board of commissioners can understand what the planning board was thinking, because they were part of that same conversation, because it happens at the same meeting. So we've seen that too.
When Matt's asked, why can't they go out and look at something? I look at every property that comes up.
Because you're a planning board, so planning board has a little bit of different rules because you're an advisory board. And right now, I know you're approving site plans, but moving forward, that's not going to happen, because the planning board is intended to be an advisory board, not a decision maker. So decision-making is Board of Adjustment and Board of Commissioners. So that's the reason. It's not, again, none of this was intended to take away power. It is literally meant to just either make the process more efficient or more in line with 160D. None of this that we're trying to do here is trying to say, we want to take away power from you, because there's definitely different ways that we can go about making sure that everybody still has a say, that neighbors still have a say, and that, you know, again, it's held up by the law, because again, the last thing you want to do is, you know, have a lawsuit because a procedure wasn't followed. So, happy to entertain some ideas, you know, go home, think about it, how we could do this in a different light, but these, I think we've kind of covered most of the options. If you want me to provide any more additional information on what those options are, we can outline those a little bit more. But again, I think it's either a quasi-judicial hearing, or, sorry, an evidentiary hearing through a quasi-judicial process, conditional zoning, which is a legislative process, an administrative process with a legislative hearing, and those basically are the three, I would think. Or it just becomes entirely administrative and the board doesn't hear it. And then either planning board can hear it, TRC can hear it, or Aaron would make the final decision.
But in the conditional, I'm sorry, I don't mean to stop everybody and jump in. Conditional rezoning, though, it would go into the sequence of planning board would look at it,
Correct.
talk about it, give an advisory to the board of commissioners.
Correct.
and then
Correct.
that-
And any right, and any applicant can request a conditional zoning. Yeah, but any applicant can request a conditional zoning. That's not anything required. So, and that would take that would take precedent over anything on this chart if they
Would a
wanted.
major subdivision be conditional zoning?
It could, sure.
And then every house has to have their site plan exactly as they.
Not every individual house, the entire subdivision would have to be designed. So like, we see this a lot. Say the open space went from 2 acres to 1.5 acres, and they made a couple of lots bigger. Because they reduced the amount of open space, they would have to come back before the board. They're kind of bound by the square footage of open space. It says in the ordinance what they can change. That is written into there. But they pretty much have to stick to that site plan that they submit.
I have another question back on the same thing I've been dead on.
Sure.
On standing. And the experience that I've had too is the other lawyer will tell the person they have standing or not. And I assume in a quasi-judicial hearing, I'm the quasi-judge and I'm the one that decides standing.
Yeah, so the other lawyer doesn't say you have standing. What I do in those, because effectively, I guess I start becoming something of a referee. And look, I can't lean my thoughts or beliefs in how that process needs to play out in that hearing on either side of the scale. I represent the board, but what effectively is, especially in some of these hearings you're thinking about, Max, where there are 2 adversarial parties, and one in particular where they both had lawyers, all right? And when people are intending to come up and present evidence as a party, they have to have standing. And when you have 2 lawyers, it's just like a court proceeding where you have like a plaintiff and defendant. And if the lawyers, if there's a question about something that this lawyer wants to do, and the judge looks and says, do you have a problem with that? And he goes, no, I got a problem with that. Then the judge says, okay, well, y'all don't have a problem with it. I'm just here to kind of make sure everything goes properly, as long as that's not illegal. So what we end up doing is, I have the fellow or the gentleman, lady comes up, I explain to them how standing works, explain to the board, haven't heard that, sir, madam, how do you have standing? How do you have, would you incur some sort of particular harm if this, based on the approval or denial of this? And they explain that, and then a lot of times I'll look at the other attorney of this adversarial party and say, do you have an objection to their standing, right? And if they say, I have no objection, what they basically said is, we're the other party, we're okay with it. And then, of course, it still is up to the board as the judges in the room to say, well, I still rule they don't have standing. Or, in the alternative, that lawyer could say, no, I object to their standing. I don't think they've established that they have standing. You could say, well, I appreciate your objection, lawyer, but I rule that they do. It's up to us. You as a board, rule on that.
So how would how would that happen in nuts and bolts? Would it be me saying, I believe they do run it, and it'd be over, or we'd have to vote on it?
I'd vote on it. I think that in those sorts of hearings, and we're again reiterating sort of the cumbersomeness of those sorts of hearings and why they need to be limited to matters of serious import. But I think that's gonna come up infrequently enough, and it's important enough, because if you say that person does not have standing, our rules currently, they can get up and speak. They can't really present any evidence. They can basically just give some testimony, and they cannot cross-examine witnesses, and that's big, because if you have standing, then after the engineer or traffic expert says all the stuff that they say, if I have standing, that's the point where, you feel like the other guy's just getting railroaded. But if he has standing, he can say, well, now, wait a minute. I want to ask you a question about this study you did, and how many of these studies do you do, and do you ever find that there is a traffic problem, and, haven't you been paid by this applicant? And they can get into all of that. They have the standing to ask those questions. So standing's a big deal. I think the board, my advice would be let the board rule on that in the meeting at that time, sort of ad hoc.
Yeah, I don't see how, if I'm a traffic person and I'm paid by the party, and I'm render the paperwork they want to do, and I have no repercussions if what I say doesn't go, I don't see how I have standing.
Well, they don't have standing. They're witnesses. They're witnesses called by parties with standing.
Witnesses in their field.
It's like if you're in a lawsuit and you sued William, and then you call Erin to come and testify. She just, you put her up there and ask her questions. She answers. She sits down. It's up to this board to weigh out. That's really your key job in a quasi-judicial hearing, is to, well, I heard Erin, and I heard this guy, and I heard that lady, and I heard all this, and do I believe them? Do I leave this one more? You weigh that all out, just like a judgment.
So what happens, do we have to hire our own traffic guy to come in and tell us something different? Or can we say, well, I hear you, Mr. Traffic Dude, but I don't believe you?
You cannot believe him.
In our ordinance, a requirement for a traffic impact analysis to be done, but there's a trigger, and so we can always look at, do we need to change what triggers it? Right now, it's roughly 100 lots for residential, or I think it's 25,000 square feet of commercial space. And so with that, and I think what Karen, we talked about that as well, because right now it reads sort of that the applicant can provide their own expert or their own report, their own traffic impact analysis hired by their own person.
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if we changed that, but we talked about
Yeah,
it.
we talked about it, that, we should be, having our own consultant, engineer, traffic expert look at it and requiring the applicant to
Pay for it.
pay for it.
Yeah.
I know that
There's a couple of different ways that you guys could do that. Yeah.
The permit, if you apply this amount, then the permit.
It's like a building inspection or
In
something.
the past, however, we haven't had a subdivision that hits that level. When it was before you an approval, it was either just below that threshold. And I believe the one that kind of almost was right there at that level for that approval, they said, okay, the town per your development ordinance doesn't require it, but I'm gonna provide my own traffic impact analysis from what I've heard from our adjacent property owners, or I'm just this close to it, so I'll go ahead and provide my own expert analysis from a traffic.
Along
But we
that,
could
along
reduce
that, along that line, let's say that I had some land around Benson, and I thought to myself, I want to get out of some of these things, so I'm going to ask for 100 houses, and then I'm going to come back in 3 months and ask for 100 more. How are we going to get around that? Not like that's ever happened before in the past year or two. But,
Well,
You talking about
I think
traffic?
we would have like a traffic impact analysis?
Well, just the whole thing, you know, I don't know, I still can't, I know I'm saying the same thing, but I can't get over that a man or a person can come in here and we have to listen to him and have to go by what he says, and he has no repercussions over it, and he's paid by one party, and I know that traffic people are above reproach, but I don't know if that's true.
Well, just remember though, Max, you don't have to agree.
We can,
You weigh it in, right? That's that party saying, yes, I paid him. And yes, he's my guy in here, he's my witness, but he's told you his credentials and he's shown you his reports, and we say you should, you know, you factor that into your analysis. Now the problem becomes the other party is probably not going to have, unless they, you know, again got their act together and got a lawyer and said you need to hire your own traffic guy and let them go in there and argue with each other or something. They generally don't do that, and so I think what you feel like, Max, is I'm in here basically said, well, I've just got to go with this man says, you know, and that's, you don't.
well, I think the point of us doing this tonight, we put ourselves through that by the process that we currently have. And the point of this is to change that process, and I would ask you from the other side of, why should I have to come to this board who is rotating people who are experts in none of this? None of us are experts in this. I have to go to this board who's a bunch of volunteers who most of the time we appreciate what you do, but you may not be experts in this. And as we rotate every 4 years as commissioner, every 2, 3 years, whatever it is for the planning board, you have to bring somebody on new. And then what training do we get? What training do we get in this? We don't. We sit here and we ask questions. And I look at it, and I depend on the staff. And so if the staff is doing a job based on the rules that we create, why do we have to bring them in here? Why don't we say, hey, we get to create the rule book, and you make sure they play by the rule book, and then we don't have to deal with any of that. I mean, then it takes this is my neighbor out of it. It takes the personal feeling out of it. It takes the liability out of me putting conditions on this developer because I don't know this developer being able to bend the rules for this developer because he's homegrown.
I'll say another thing that takes that out of it
takes that out.
is where you get, y'all know the type of hearing I'm talking about, where you get a application, developers got everything in order, got the experts, got the lawyer, it's being presented nice and neat, but you've got 8, 10, 15 on the other side, no attorney, no, and you know, and I do my best to, I can't help their case, but try to explain it to them, but they're in here, and all y'all see is, you got a bunch of ticked off people that really don't want this. The fact of the matter is, a lot of the time, although we're pretty liberal about the amount of testimony we're allowing them to give, a lot of them don't have standing, a lot of them aren't obeying even the general whiff of the rules of evidence that you're kind of supposed to abide by. But you're looking out there at a bunch of angry people on this side, and then lawyers and experts who are all paid to try to get some stuff done so somebody can make a bunch of money. And I think the point William's making is well made. If you make some of that, if you are good with your rules and say, as long as you go right by my rules, then you can build your developments. You take some of that off of your plate, where you have those real fractious, uncomfortable meetings that, on the one hand, they've probably proven with substantial evidence presented at the hearing, all of the findings are satisfying all of the findings of fact. But you've got a bunch of upset people over there who really haven't proven a whole lot of anything, but they're upset, and it's hard to vote against them. So, and then you get into that's ripe for a lawsuit in that sort of situation.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, when it is a quasi-judicial proceeding, the commissioners, can they not, subpoena people?
Yeah.
And call their own expert witnesses?
Yes.
And they don't have to make a decision right at
You don't.
that hearing? They can gather their own information for any of the findings that may be in question? They have that power, right?
Absolutely. Or you can direct the parties to state that I need more information on this, and essentially telling him, like a judge in a case looking at a lawyer, you don't give me more of this, I can't see my way through of approving it. So, and the parties, the applicant especially, more than happy to go run back and try to find more evidence for you, you know. So yeah, you're not, and remember, I think I think this board sometimes feels like, we can talk about this more later because we're here to talk about the UDO, but you feel like you're kind of pushed and herded into a corral, and then you're forced to make a decision. And, you know, if you feel like you need more facts and you need more evidence, then you absolutely have it is within your purview for sure to say, I need to have that. And if you say, I need to go out there and look at it, then schedule a time to go and table the matter until such time that everybody can go out there and look at it. And the parties can come and do that as well. So. And after this process, or concomitant with it, I'm happy to, I think we've done this once or twice before, or we've kind of had like a quasi-judicial, you know, and we can do legislative boot camp kind of thing, where we come and present, you know, for 30 minutes on a night where we don't have a lot going on the agenda, which I don't know when that's going to be. It won't be till next year probably, but I'm happy to do that because that would be more appropriate for that time rather than when we're talking about the particulars of the UDO.
And if I can add too, the UDO, yes, we've spent a lot of time and you've spent a lot of money paying us to write this, but this UDO is not intended to be the end-all be-all. Like, just because it's approved does not mean that it doesn't change. Text amendments are a very, very important process in your UDO. You can change the UDO. So say you have a development that comes in and you've decided to stay SUP, or not an SUP, you stay quasi-judicial, and you have just a hearing that just goes on and on and on and on. And you've decided after months, like, that this is not what you want. You can write a text amendment that will change this. This ordinance is not intended, again, it's intended to be that set of rules, but you have the power to change those rules if something doesn't work. So I just don't want you to feel like, oh my gosh, if we approve this, this is gonna stay like this for the next 10 years. It's not encouraged that you're constantly changing it, but at the same time, I don't want you to feel that this is the end-all be-all. A lot of work and study has gone into this, so the recommendations that we're making were not done in a glass bowl. But I want you to understand that there are methods to amend the ordinance if you realize that after a couple months or a year that this is not working for you, this process that you've decided upon, you can change it without having to change your whole ordinance. So I just want to let you know, that's not the route we want to go, but that is absolutely an option, and that is why, you know, planning, it's planning, you know, we want to be able to make those concessions, and not for individuals, you know, but you as a board feel that something's not working. That's why we change it.
I have a question. So Aaron, you said if we didn't go in quasi-judicial and we changed it to conditional zoning, that it's a whole lot more work for you in the future to verify and check everything. Do you have the personnel to be able to do that, or something else you need to change so that you could, that if we did make it, if we changed it and if we did away with quasi-judicial and we went with conditional zoning?
I think that, you know, that our personnel definitely need to grow as the town grows. If we're seeing, you know, 20 conditional zonings and we're having this continual influx of development and construction, naturally our personnel will have to grow and our department will have to grow to, you know, provide those services and keep administratively what we need to do to, or administratively to keep and organize. Yes, so definitely, as the town grows, our department needs to grow.
Go ahead, Jean.
This might have something to do with standing, but also neighborhood meeting notices. I may have emailed you this question, but now that I talked about standing, it's like we mail the neighborhood notices to the property owners.
Correct.
But what about the people that actually live there? They don't get a notice, but they would have more standing than the owner, right? Because they're there,
You mean if,
like renters. If
Oh, yeah, they should have it. They should be able
They
to,
get notices?
they should. Yeah, they should.
Okay, right now, that's an excellent point, Jean, because right now, when we send notices for hearings, we send it to the address of record, because I believe that's the minimum standard.
Mhm.
It doesn't say in general statute that we have to send it to the actual site, and then that becomes a question, does a tenant truly have standing? I think if we want to be more inclusive, if we want to bring in more,
Feedback from the community.
community, then yes, that's something that I think is definitely, an excellent point, even for rezonings. We send those to the address of record, not necessarily the property. And so if it's a tenant occupied, and the owner lives, out of state, they're getting that letter, not the tenant.
Oh, I see what you're
That's
saying.
a
Oh.
great.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question, Gina. I thought you meant if it was more of like an apartment complex where they all have their individual addresses, but I know what you're saying, like a property owner. I guess it goes to the owner. The city of Raleigh has an ordinance or requires tenants to be noticed.
Yeah, I think that would be.
I'm pretty sure Raleigh does.
That's a good consideration, but again, do they have standing? Well, then
You have to,
again,
you have to
eviction
demonstrate,
hearing.
standings, it's not there's no like elemental test of 10 points and you have to get 6, right? It's not like that. You have to demonstrate that you would suffer some particular harm, right? Generally economic. I own the property next door. That's pretty much good enough. That's good enough. If you do this, if you let them do this and I'm next door, it's going to impact me. I'm across the road. I live down the street and the traffic's it's already bad and I can testify as to the traffic. You're probably there with standing. Again, it becomes up to the board on a more questionable one, but standing is, I have to demonstrate that through my own sworn testimony is the foundation of it, that I would suffer some sort of particular harm if you allowed or didn't allow this, right, if I want to argue in favor of it. So.
I think too, Karen, this is something that came up at the planning conference, that we may need to consider is when a development has been approved. Prior to that approval, we have a neighborhood meeting, but after that development has been approved, before they start construction, I think we may need to think about that developer, that builder, whomever, to have another neighborhood meeting to discuss construction timelines, expectations,
Impacts.
things like that. And I'm wondering, can we build that into the ordinance, that additional conversation with those adjacent property owners?
Sure, we could write that in there. That is a, pre-construction meeting.
And include the tenants, or anytime we're notifying people that we could say, I don't know. You can speak more, probably look into that more, we can look into that more about, like for hearings, rezonings, anything that we send out hearing notices for, that we are, notifying, tenants or the actual site, property site, as well as the mailing
Individual.
address of record.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that a little bit more as to how that wording works, but yeah, we could absolutely write that in there.
It's like I said, one of the biggest issues is you have all these people coming up and they say they have standing. Recently, there was someone who was given standing, and they were not a property owner, and they were just upset. They were just upset because something was being built, and it's like, I came here, and I live here, and I want to be the last person who lives here. A lot of the people who come seem to have that. It's like, I came here, and I like looking out on that field, and we actually heard this with one a couple years ago. I came here and I like looking out there and I like to see the birds, kind of like to see all that. I want to be the last person. That's exactly what the person said. So if we didn't you know, is there any way other than the conditional zoning to avoid that? Because a lot of it is, it's not necessarily that they truly have a reason, that they have an actual fact that goes against it. It is some hurt feelings.
Yeah.
And they're not exactly accurate when they come in here. They're not necessarily truthful. They don't really know what they're talking
And there
about.
should, and that's written in the ordinance today, is written in quasi judicial, that anyone that's providing testimony, it must be relevant, competent, and material to the facts of the case. And, you know, that's one of those things, you gotta keep them.
Well,
keep
and
them
see,
in
that's the
line.
thing, we're generally pretty liberal with allowing them to
Maybe
kind of
maybe-
say a lot of stuff, and the problem becomes, and there was a recent hearing that was much like this, where there was a lot of things being said that really weren't relevant, that really were just, you know, yeah, like Carolyn's talking about, and the other side wasn't objecting. I even looked down at them a couple times, like, I've had judges do that to me in court. Kind of like, maybe I was focusing on something I was about to say later or something, and I look up and the judge is looking at me like, you gonna object? And I'm, objection, and they go, sustained. Like I'm missing something, but I can't make them object. You know, now, but remember, the all-important decision, that all of this stuff, that it all funnels down to the decision that y'all make. And what you gotta remember is, you're the ones that have to weigh all that out and say, yeah, I heard that guy or that lady, and I know they really like looking out there at that open space, and they seem to really hit that issue a lot, but really that's not relevant when it comes to, you know, whether or not, you know, this person's particular desire to just never see the property developed around them so that they can have a nice bucolic scene on their back porch is not enough to deny what, you know, all this substantial evidence that this developer or applicant has presented. So that's where y'all have to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff.
But,
Well,
No, ma'am,
what, I'm hearing a lot of stuff that I didn't know before. Because I've always been under the impression that when we had those hearings, that our hands were tied. I never really understood that we had the right to question or, you know, oppose the other person, especially if they had attorneys. Because all I would hear is, we're gonna be sued if we didn't do it. Now, I've heard that before.
Well, there's been a few times where there's been a case in particular I can recall where there was no one in opposition, and they made what's the legal term is prima facie case. They checked all the boxes. They had presented evidence. And there is case law that essentially says, look, there's no one over here arguing against me. I've shown you evidence that, you know, you guess you could disagree with it, but, you know, on its face, I've proved the elements and that I'm supposed to. And you, in other words, you can't deny me. Now, in that situation, you could say, well, I'm not completely satisfied with certain parts of it. I need more information. I need more evidence. I'd like to go look at the property, or I want you to submit another, you know, piece of information or something like that. I'm not thinking, even then you're completely handcuffed, but that is the law. If, you know, now if you've got two sides and you've weighed it out, you make your decision. You're never handcuffed. And I do want this board to understand that too. You definitely have the ability to ask for more evidence, and if you don't feel satisfied on any particular part. But I think to Carolyn's point too, if you have the quasi-judicial hearings, the nature of it that we're talking about right now is part and parcel to it. So
we had a quasi-judicial, I think, that we done something, and the attorney is already prepared to go to Johnston County Court to file.
They did.
Yeah, he did. So that's what would happen. It would go before a judge, and a judge like, yeah, you did show proof, I'm approving it.
Yeah.
And overrule us.
But the way this presented, unless it was something major, like 40 or 20,000 square foot or more of a major site plan, it would all be administrative. That would never hit us. And we get to make the decision on what we want to hear and what we don't want to hear. When do we want to be put in that position? Is it 20,000 square foot or 40 multifamilies or not? I mean, or do we not want to hear it at all? We've got to do to say, hey, this should all be administrative. And then there is no quasi-judicial hearing. There is no, you know, come before the board and ask, because I'm a contractor, read the contractor, right? If I go by this book and I decide I want to build here, and I go by this book, and I come in here and I make all these teas, why should I have to come and sit before the six of you and ask for more permission when I've already done everything I'm supposed to do? I mean, from the business, if we want to be business friendly and we want to invite residential development and commercial development, all our rules should be in this book, so, because the big people aren't calling the town of Benson asking questions, they're going to the website and they're pulling this up and they're saying, good God, look at what I've got to do to get into that town. I've got to go and spend all this money and then bring it to 6 people and convince those 6 people that I can do what you say I can do. Does that make sense? And that's what our process is right now.
And then you get those 15 people mad as fire at y'all in here, even though the other person did everything they were supposed to do, and it puts y'all in a very awkward situation, because you don't want to tell the people that you live near, like, hey man, they did everything they were supposed to do. We really should probably pass this on a business standpoint. Now, you say it's not good for the town, that's where y'all can make an executive decision and say we don't want that. But when you look at these papers right here and you say, hey man, I got everything done for 15 lots and it's out behind, 50 highway, right by the school. Nothing we can talk about if you check all these boxes, really. That's kind of what we're getting at.
So just for an example, the town of Wake Forest, that's where I live, they have.
Where do you stand in the process that you started to accomplish here?
I'm sorry, excuse me? I don't understand the question.
Where do you stand on what you were hoping to accomplish tonight?
Oh, me?
Oh. Which one are you talking to? You're talking
Which
to
one?
Karen,
Karen,
right?
or-
From my perspective.
Oh, me.
Okay.
Oh, well, good. This is the conversation I wanted to have. I mean, I'm really looking for the feedback because this is, again, this isn't my ordinance. This is your ordinance. So I really want the impact, y'all have to live with this. I want your opinion and for this to be the best process for you moving forward. I was just going to give the example that in the town that I live in, they just made the decision, well, not just, about 2 years ago, they made the decision that anything under 100,000 square feet of commercial is administrative. 100, I think it's 150 residential units and under is administrative. The boards wouldn't even hear it. So the majority of their stuff, though, is conditional zoning, and then it comes in as a legislative hearing. So the property behind my house has 120,000 square feet of commercial, 300 apartments, and 120 townhomes. And the only reason we saw it once, and it was for the conditional zoning. I will never see that property again unless I go bug the planning department. So there are different thresholds you can set. You can lower it, you can higher it, or make it higher. There are possibilities, and again, that's why we're having the conversation. So I'm happy to hear that you're all talking about it and considering it. Think about those thresholds as you go home tonight, and you think about that. The other one I just wanted to bring up to your attention, because in case we didn't talk about it, because we talked about a lot of quasi-judicial, the major site plan, that will also come before you as a board. That will go before you, though, as an administrative hearing. So you don't have that flexibility because it's an administrative hearing. You're just hearing it because it's a bigger development, and we want to keep you informed. If you don't feel that you need that, make that administrative, like Aaron was talking about, or make that conditional zoning, or make that quasi-judicial. But right now, it's administrative. Your hands are tied. You're just going to hear it. If they cross all their T's and they dot all their I's, you have to approve that. And because it's just a hearing for people to come out and speak.
So why should they hear it about a major site?
That's just right now, that's what you're approving. As the planning board right now, it's planning board approving it. Planning board's technically not supposed to be the approval body on a decision like that. So we're making it still administrative, but we're just making the board of commissioners hear it. You would.
Why shouldn't it just be administrative?
We can. It's just, this is just, we were trying to make it as close to what is existing as possible. We didn't want to upset that apple cart too much. But we're happy to do whatever is in the, again, in that best interest. We did it, right now, planning board's making that decision administratively. So,
I want to make sure I understand. So if they come in here and everything's been met, there's.
yes, it just gives it just gives the public the opportunity to voice their opinion without having to have standing. They can just come up and talk about it.
The other advantage of that, and just not throwing stones, because I've been there too, but that means that if we miss a planning meeting this month because of a quorum, or we miss a board meeting because of a quorum, that administratively, our employees can still do their job to keep working and get these projects underway versus waiting on people to be able to come. And putting people with projects off 30 or 60 or 90 days, and every month it's costing more and more money the longer they wait and sit on loans and interest and everything else and try to get the project underway.
Right now, the major site plan threshold is very small. It's, I believe it's 2,500 square feet.
Right now it is, yeah. It's very small. I mean, 2,500 square feet is like a Dunkin' Donut.
Well, I have a fundamental question, hence the name planning board. If we're trying to manage the town, if it doesn't go to anybody, it all handles in your office, how are we managing it?
By creating the rules.
Yeah, the rules are managing it.
Well,
And it's
So
so
these have to be
it has to go to, exactly, and it has to go to technical review, so it's not just Aaron looking at it or planning looking at it, it's fire looking at it, it's stormwater, if it hits those triggers for stormwater, these thresholds it would, but, you know. Utilities, everyone would come together and look at it before it is stamped up, approved, you know.
And honestly, planning board could be one of the reviewers of it, but you could get it as like a report, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would assume that everybody's getting like a development report. I don't know, do you put out a staff report? So you could get it. It wouldn't be that you would be, you know, the idea would be to eliminate the meetings, right? That's what is holding up the process sometimes, or the number of meetings that an applicant has to appear before boards. So you would get that as part of the staff, you know, the staff report.
And maybe I look at this wrong, y'all tell me if y'all think, I mean, planning is always the hot topic, right? But realistically, in my mind, it's just another department of the town. I don't want the chief of the police to have to come and sit in front of a board before he enforces the law in the town. I give him the law, I give him the ordinances, I want him to go out there and do his job. That's the way I look at Aaron as the director of planning. I want to give you the rules and I want you to go do the job. That way I don't get slapped in the face, right? And I think we continue, because we do care. We care about people, we care about their opinion. But when you look at it at a business standpoint, the only right that a person has to prevent a property from doing something is the right to check for the property and to own it. I mean, if you look at it as a business standpoint. And so, and if you don't do that, we're just subjecting ourselves to and subjecting that applicant to a bunch of wishy-washiness, right? We're saying do this and we'll approve it, unless 5 or 6 people that we really like show up and argue, and then we're going to side with them because we don't in our whole lives, right? And that's what our process looks like a lot of times.
No, we would never do that.
No, we wouldn't, because our attorney gives us great advice, and he looks at us when we do wrong
Never
things.
do that.
2,500 square feet for commercial, I mean, that is nothing.
Right, and that's why we went up to 20,000. But we can even go higher. I mean, it could be 60,000. The suggestion, someone told me, you know, because Board of Commissioners, you make the big bucks. I'm just tongue in cheek, but that, you know, you're paid to make the tough decisions. So it should be the board should be hearing the ones that are difficult, the ones that are going to impact the town the greatest, those nuisance uses, those, and that's what that SUP process was really created for, was to create, you know, to put not a blockade, but to put a level of, you know, meeting those criteria for those, like, you know, nuisance type uses, rather than just these everyday uses. Like, I was just looking down, like, we have SUPs like child care centers, Like, I think we would probably eliminate that from an SUP, because if they provide their, that's really going to be approved by the state anyway. So, I'm just looking down here, like, what could we remove from an SUP so that the board doesn't have to have those ugly discussions or lengthy discussions about that? So as you go through your land use table, look at SUPs, because anything that is an SUP right now is going to come to you as part of this quasi-judicial procedure. So look into that a little bit more, maybe. It's the permitted use table. And we can, look at that and bring those comments back to us and stuff like that. So
The reason I asked you the question that I did,
yes, sir.
this information came to all the board 2 days ago. And I would be surprised if anybody read this
Correct, yes.
before we came to the meeting. So the questions that we've had today is from old information, and when you go through this, I think what you're saying is, we'll take our word for it, because we've done a lot of hard work on this.
No, you guys are getting this tonight with the changes. On the November 14th meeting, Erin's going to basically come up to the board and say, do you have any further questions or suggestions? And she's not looking for approval on this until December. So you're going to have plenty of time to review. We're not looking for any type of approval right now. Huh?
I don't remember anything like that.
Well, but I'm saying you're going to have time to review it some more, give Erin your comments, so we can make any revisions that we need to make prior to it going to be up for approval in December.
When's the public hearing?
December, right?
December. I'm going to go, if you
She moved it. She moved it.
So that's just the appendices. So here's this is the, I call it homework. It's not real homework, because that will cause PTSD for some people. So basically what you're going to do is, when you're reviewing this, these are just some of the hints when you're reviewing this. Anything that you see highlighted, those are for us, when we merge all the sections together, that's for us to just double check the section numbers, so that, because right now we just have crazy section numbers in there. Anything that's highlighted is really for us internally at Withers, for us to put together those numbers, create hyperlinks between the sections. You may, I think the versions that you have received, now Planning Board, you have different versions. You have the versions with the comments in it that you all have provided to us. Board of Commissioners, you have clean copies based on the recommendations and everything thus far. So anything that you have moving forward from tonight forward, anything that's changing, we are tracking the changes, so that what we've presented to you tonight, if we do make changes to this permitted use table or anything else that we get comments back, we have some comments from planning board members and steering committee members. When they provided us those comments, we haven't gone through and changed everything, because for us to address each little change one by one is very cumbersome. We want to get everybody's comments together and then make some recommendations. You will see those changes highlighted by the next time you see it. So anything major like that you will see before the next meeting. Again, this is a draft version. We came to you as a work session. We tried to do a work session the last time. Unfortunately, like I said, we were like the last thing on the agenda, and we were here at 10 o'clock at night, so it was really hard to have those conversations. So that's why we really wanted to do this one, and I am very grateful that we had the floor tonight and we could talk about this. I want you to take that back, and again, you have 2 weeks. We're asking, here are the key dates. The steering committee had their last meeting on October 9th, or October 11th, that was. We're having that joint workshop meeting tonight. We're going to ask for your draft comments or kind of concerns by November 10th. That's 2.5 weeks from tonight. That would allow us time to incorporate some of those concerns, and that also gives us the weekend, so that when Erin comes before you on the 14th with some questions or any follow-up, we would have a really good idea of the questions and comments that have been back to us. So we're really kind of looking between that November 10th and 14th to be making those final changes, or for you to see those final changes. And when I say final, it's nothing is ever final, because then it's going to go to the planning board. We'll make sure that everything is put up online. The planning board will go for recommendation on December 5th, and then we'll have a public workshop before the public hearing. So I will set up in here and answer any questions of anybody from the public that wants to come in and talk about the ordinance. We'll be here on December 12th. Then you'll have your public hearing and hopefully adopt the ordinance on the 12th of December. And then the ordinance will be effective January 1st of I think that says 2023, it should say 2024. Sorry. And again, this is your ordinance. A big shout out and thank you to Aaron, who has read most, if not all, of every single thing that we have written, and to the steering committee members who have also put in countless hours of meetings and listening to me talk. And thank you again for having me here tonight to present this to you. I look forward to getting your comments and feedback. And again, please direct anything to Aaron, and Aaron can get that to me and to our staff, who will incorporate those. And if there needs to be a larger conversation, we can create an email chart, an email chain. If there's something that you direct me to go back and change, we can do this. And then also moving forward to, when time comes for the discussion and the planning board recommendation, if planning board recommends something different than what's in the ordinance, you know, we can strike something from the ordinance and go ahead and approve it. I don't want you to feel that this is, again, an all or nothing. We want to make it work for you, and because you guys have to implement this for the next couple of years. So thank you again, and I appreciate it. Have a good night, and I'm sorry I talked for so long. Thanks, guys.
Okay, Kim.
All right, so we have in front of y'all for the next board meeting, as I stated to all you before this meeting started, is the November 14th is looking to be a kind of packed agenda. So we are going to have quite a bit of public hearings. Two of these public hearings are our electric ordinance that we've discussed numerous times. It's on paper. I've given it to y'all to review. And our social district, we have to have operation and maintenance plans in order to have a social district. There has to be an ordinance that is passed, and all this has to be done before we can make our application to ALE for our actual social district. So I've handed that out to y'all as well. Both have been reviewed by Ike. If you guys have any questions in the next 2 weeks on this, just let me know. We can sit down and discuss it. Also, as you look through the UDO, if you want to have a meeting with Erin, let her know. We can do 2 at a time if we need to. But happy to sit down and discuss the UDO further. I know it's a lot. Moving on to events, tomorrow night is our Hallow Fest. We are going to start blocking off Main Street at 5 o'clock. Hallow Fest actually begins at 6:30 promptly. We will, for all those watching, we will not allow them to start trick-or-treating or going through the line until 6:30. We want to make sure we give everybody proper time to get their cars set up. That's supposed to end at 8:30, but it will end when the last trick-or-treater walks through. Then next weekend, November the 4th, we have our Veterans Day celebration. It starts at 9 o'clock with our annual 5K race. 11 o'clock, we are going to have a parade. And then at noon, there will be an event in the Grove. We are having another sanctioned pig picking that day. So we'll have barbecue plates for $10, free for veterans. And there'll be a celebration. They'll have bands. They'll have a kids zone for kids, so fun for all ages. And so that will be Saturday, November the 4th. And there's also going to be a motorcycle and car show. So big event out there. And then we will be closed on November the 10th in honor of Veterans Day. And that is all I have.
I just want to add to that, on November the 11th, there's going to be the ribbon cutting for the Veterans Memorial. And they really have done a great job on that, and you're really going to be surprised when you see what's there. And Town Attorney.
The only thing I'll say is, if any member of either board would like to discuss any, especially the quasi-judicial stuff that we talked about, you know, that's kind of, we really gotten to the granular level here tonight with that. My email, if you don't have it, it's on the website, email me or call me. And if maybe a few want to, we can sit down with Aaron and myself, and I'll be happy to go through that. Maybe at a later date, we'll do it with the board, or come to the planning board and then the big board, but just throwing that out there. Happy to spend some time on that if anybody'd like to. Or anything else for that matter. But
Max.
Don't have anything.
Sandra. Maxine.
Yeah.
Will.
A couple of things, the road right behind the Benson Middle School, we've had many wrecks right there. They go right through the woods, called DOT. The very next day, they put up new signs. They are actually going to, if that's not enough errors, you've got a street that goes right into 301, sharp curve with nothing, that we used to have one there and it got tore down. They have put up several signs. Another thing that I have talked with the police department and the fire department, and we've looked. I've been told it had to come from this board to make a decision on Dunn Street and Parish Drive as far as putting a four-way stop right there. That's coming out behind McDonald's from Food Line. And if you will go that way every day, you will see exactly what I'm talking about. I hate four-way stops, but that is one place that it will work. And this board has to make the decision on whether or not we do it. Only thing they're going to have to do is put up 2 stop signs, and the caution light that's already up there, they will just make it flash red just like they did at the other one. So it's going to cost very little to do that if this board decides to go that route.
Let's get that on the agenda next time. You're next.
And that'll do it.
I don't have anything.
Anybody else have anything for the cause? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that we adjourn.
All in favor, say aye. All opposed, no. Ayes have it.
Do I now?